Okay, welcome to part 2 of the lecture. Here we're going to dive into a few particular case studies. Let's get a little background on mosques in general. First, from Indonesia to the United Kingdom, the mosque in its many forms is really quintessential Islamic building. And here we mean that very precisely. It is the architecture of Islamic spaces of worship. The mosque is the Muslim gathering place for prayer. Technically, it means the place of prostration. Though most of the 5 daily prayers prescribed in Islam can take place anywhere, all men are required to gather together at the mosque for the Friday noon prayer. Mosques are also used throughout the week for prayer, study, or simply as a place for rest and reflection. The main mosque of a city, used for the Friday communal prayer, is called the Jami Masjid, which literally means Friday mosque. But it's also sometimes called a congregational mosque. The style, layout, and decoration of a mosque can tell us a lot about Islam in general, but also about the period and the region in which the mosque was constructed. Take a look at what we're seeing on the slide. First of all, what kind of architectural diagram is it? And second, take a minute just to imagine the space. From what you know about what this plan is showing you, what kind of space could we expect here? If one walked into this, what would you see as you looked around? This is the plan of what is thought to be the Prophet Muhammad's own home. And that home is considered the very first mosque. His house was in Medina, which is now modern Saudi Arabia, and it was a typical Arabian-style house from the 7th century. It had a large courtyard, as you can see, surrounded by a series of rooms, particularly we can see those on the right. And those rooms were supported by large columns, which you now know are distinguished by those dots on the plan. This type of mosque is known as the Mosque of Many Columns. The other word for that is hypostyle. What are we looking at here? In the center of the image, we're looking at the Suleimani Mosque itself. But a mosque is not a standalone building. Generally, many mosques incorporate charitable institutions like soup kitchens, hospitals, schools. Some mosque patrons even create their own mausoleums or spaces of burial within the mosque. Generally, the support of charitable institutions is an important part of Islamic practice. It's part of the 3rd pillar of Islam, in fact, which calls for Muslims to donate a portion of their income to the poor. The mosque, then, the architecture of the mosque is set up to meet each of these facets and functions. It has a social purpose, it has a communal purpose, and it has a function in terms of bodily health. And we see that through the schools, through the hospitals, and through food service areas. There are also often public baths, and sometimes something akin to a hostel, which is called a caravanserai, that is also built into the mosque complex. Take a minute to look at this plan. Let's begin on the right. This is the plan of the mosque that we just saw in the image before. You can see here on the far right an open courtyard space that has a small entity there in the middle, but primarily an open space. Again, this is a space where the call to prayer would occur, and it's built to accommodate the male population of the city. What else do we see around there? That series of small circles delineates a series of small kubas or domes. And then as we pass through from that right courtyard space into the hall of the mosque itself, we can begin to get a feel for the architecture. We see here again the Byzantine plan that we examined 1 or 2 days before. It's a central plan, and we know this because of that central circle, which not only lets you know what's happening with the plan, but it also gives you an image of where the dome sits, the primary dome, the main dome, above this section of the building. Those massive gray clusters that surround the square that houses that central circle, those are massed columns. In some mosques, they'll run all the way to the floor. In others, there's a series of architectural stacking that occurs on the roof to distribute the weight out and away from that central space or the central nave. If one continued through the center of the nave to the left wall, you can see just a tiny, tiny semicircle that is headed from the inside space to the outward space. And that's the mihrab. Just above that to the right, here, you can see the minbar, that set of stairs and the sort of platform space from which the imam conducts the service. As one passes out here to the left, we're now in the open courtyard in the green space of the mosque. This is the area where one might find the mausoleums we mentioned, as you see here and here. And this completes the central part of the mosque, not the mosque in its entirety, because as we know, those exterior buildings filled with other social, health, and communal functions are the extended body of the mosque grounds themselves. All right, what are we looking at here? We know it's an architectural section, correct? Because we're seeing right through the middle of the nave and the vaulted space of the dome. And here we can identify the central features of the mosque. The kuba or the dome, the primary dome here in the middle. We have 2 minarets. There's an arcade here. And notice the shape of those arches, the shape of that arcade. We'll get into that in the 4th section of this lecture. For now, move on to the next clip that I have within the modules. This is a beautiful, stunning description of both the Hagia Sophia and the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul. Thanks.